It's early morning on November 10, 1659. You stand guard outside your master Afzal Khan's tent listening to the birdsong of the jungle. After months of exhausting marches and constant negotiations with that infidel Shivaji, your master will finally be able to carry out the task he set out for. You see the sun scatter away the light fog on the hilltops nearby, and cannot help but compare the fog with Shivaji, all said to be blown away to hell by your master. Some hours later, you see a group of people walk down the only road leading from the Purandar fort to your master's tent. As they enter the clearing, you see they are led by a short person whose eyes sparkle and whose gait is that of a rampaging lion. This must be none other than Shivaji. He takes no notice of you as he goes into the tent. You chuckle internally. This would be the last time you see him anyways. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Sagas of Bharat. In this podcast, we dive into the lives of extraordinary Bharatiya men and women. Today's episode is dedicated to one of the most beloved kings in the history of Bharat, Chhattrapati Shivaji Maharaj. When I first read about Shivaji Maharaj, it was from a small book called Heroes of Bharat, which I found in a book fair as a boy. I remember thinking to myself, how can one man create such a big empire? This episode series will aim to tell you the answer to this question. What's more, throughout this episode series, I will highlight the near impossible conditions that Shivaji Maharaj had to overcome to accomplish his vision. There have been many great conquerors in the past, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and so on. But their story has something common. They were all motivated by personal ambition and often had a great head start in their journey early on. For example, Alexander was the son of an already powerful Macedonian king. Caesar was already the chief priest of Rome. Even Napoleon rose to power by exploiting the French Revolution for his personal gains. In contrast, there are two things that set Shivaji Maharaj apart from other conquerors. First, he was not driven by any personal ambition. His constant focus was to establish the Hindawi Swaraj and nothing else. Second, he was fighting against the established political order that had been in place for close to 400 years before his time. Not even Alexander or Caesar had that courage. Why was Shivaji Maharaj so intent on creating the Hindawi Swaraj? Well, after the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan in 1192, the Muslim armies had conquered most of North Bharat. South Bharat resisted until the 15th century, but was soon captured by various Muslim sultanates. Few years before Shivaji was born, Mughals ruled North Bharat and the Adil Shahi Sultanate ruled the Deccan. This meant that the Adil Shahis controlled the land between the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal in Bharat. There were some Hindu kingdoms, but they all paid tribute to either one of these powers. For example, there was an independent kingdom in Odisha, but they were only allowed to maintain their independence if they gave a certain amount of revenue to either the Adil Shahis or the Mughals. The vision of Hindavi Swaraj was not born out of political ambition, however. This is not something that Shivaji Maharaj just woke up one day and said that I will build the Hindavi Swaraj because I want personal glory. As we will see, he didn't need that personal glory. He was already living in a place which was relatively well off owing to the craftiness of his father. No, the creation of Hindavi Swaraj was born out of the need for living a dignified life as a Hindu in Bharat. Each Islamic conquest in Bharat was invariably followed by mass slaughter, mass rape, destruction of temples, and even looting of property. Even though, once the fog of war settled, Hindus did manage to get administrative positions in the courts. I mean, if you are in a foreign land, you do need the natives to interact with the other natives and take the unpleasantness of the situation from your hands, right? So this is where the Hindus were seen as buffers to interact with the other population. But the catch was they were never given an equal status as Muslims, and they always had this high ceiling that they could only attain this big position. They didn't have that like super high position for available for to them for the court. The sultans and the badshahs also levied the jizya tax, a tax on Hindus to practice their religious rituals and visit their holy places. Oftentimes, this accounted to more than 60% of the annual income of a particular household. We now know the situation in India before Shivaji's birth. His father, Shahji Bhosle, was an interesting man. During the war between Mughals and the sultanates in the south, there was a sultanate called the Nizam Shahi. So, in this Nizam Shahi, the main ruler had died and there was his young son. So, Shahji Bhosle offered his services to rule as a regent to this minor Nizam Shahi ruler. And when the Adil Shahis and the Mughals destroyed the Nizam Shahi Sultanate, he managed to somehow convince the Adil Shahis that he was more used to them alive than dead. Not only that, there is more. He managed to extract from the Adil Shahis a large land grant near Pune and managed to settle his household into a relatively affluent fort. It is here, on February 19, 1630, Shivaji was born to Shahji and his wife Jijabai. I found an interesting bit of folklore that has been passed down in oral history. Upon reading an astrological chart, the chief astrologer is said to have proclaimed the following words: "He will be the deliverance of us from the evil times that have befallen us." While many of us hardly ever live up to our astrological predictions, this is a rare case in history when astrology has been so successfully vindicated. Shahji was an exception in the Adil Shahi court as well. He was one of the highest ranking Hindus amongst all the other kinds of Muslims. So there were Afghans, there were Turks, there were Abyssinians in the court, and the only Hindu was Shahji. So it is therefore very certain that there will be many plans against him to dislodge him from the court, somehow make some charges, imprison him, execute him somehow. Not only was Shahji one of the main powerful people in their former enemies, but he was now in the position of power, and it was very difficult to just digest this thing that he was a former enemy and now given a really high position. So this meant that Shahji had to stay in Bijapur to keep a finger on the pulse of the court. He had to forestall these treacherous plans against him if he wanted to survive in the court. Shivaji, meanwhile, was being brought up by two key figures in his life: his mother Jijabai and his teacher Dadaji Konadev, who himself was a close associate of Shahji. The land grant of Pune itself may seem like a reward to many of us now. But remember, this is very different time we are talking about. At that time, Pune was a really harsh place to exist. Crops had failed. There was a general lack of good administration prior to the arrival of Dadaji and Shivaji Maharaj. And most of the peasants had actually fled. There were no crops. There was no revenue. Since there was and then there was like the constant threat of bandits. So there was a lot of work to be done at that point. But this is why Dadaji also realized that this was an ideal place for Shivaji to learn the intricacies of statecraft and management. And later on, we will see many of his policies were kind of borrowed from the teachings of Dadaji and what he personally experienced in the administering this land. So this is how he was being brought up with the material world. But the one influence in Shivaji's life that was the biggest and quite arguably the greatest influence on his personality was Jijabai. She molded his inner personality. After exhausting days attending to various affairs of Pune alongside Dadaji, Shivaji would retire to his mother's chambers, who narrated him stories of great heroes in the long history of Bharat. She told him tales of moral courage, valor, and sacrifice written in the pages of great epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. I can only imagine the calm scene in this phase of his life, sitting and listening to wonderful tales as a cool breeze flew in the night, bringing the smell of incense wafting through the inner chambers of the fort. The seeds of greatness were already evident in the fast growing Shivaji. He was called to Bijapur court once by his father when he was 11 or 12. And the objective was that Shahaji was growing concerned that this Shivaji was growing too close to his mother, and he didn't want him to just be completely forgetting his father. And the other objective was to wow him with, like, how rich Shahaji was and how much he was enjoying the splendors of the court. So he invites him to the Bijapur court, and the idea was that he's a boy of 11 or 12, and this is a different time than our time. So at 16, people were often married, so the idea was for him to enjoy some sensual pleasures as well, wine and what other stuff is there. But Shivaji was a different person. This is a boy of 11 or 12, and he's more interested in learning about administration, military organizations, and these are heavy topics for a boy. But the other sad part for Shahaji was that he tried many tricks to keep him in Bijapur. But Shivaji always longed for the company of his mother. Eventually, Shahaji had no other option but to permit him to return to Pune. In his pre-teen years, he also had a very different approach to life than the other royal princes of that time. So, most of the royal princes were brought up with extreme care and indulgence, and they only had to snap their fingers and servants would come calling to them, and they behaved very arrogantly, and often they treated their servants inhumanely and called them very really mean names. But Shivaji in this matter was also very different. He was freely mingling with everyone. So no matter whether they were a servant, or they were a soldier, or they were some other person, Shivaji was always meeting them with the same smile. And this smile is also remarked upon by the British when they first met him. This was a very captivating smile. So not only was Shivaji breaking the convention of being a prince and not acting snobbishly, but he was also actively mingling with people outside his own circle. He was not used to comfort at all. So he's a boy, maybe 13 or 14 now, and he's trekking and training himself by going through various hill passes and forests of Pune. So Pune is not a flat place. Pune has really high hills, steep ravines, and there are dense forests around there. So he's trekking in there and he's meeting people. And at the night, he's only having a single meal of buttermilk and plain salted rice. Can you imagine yourself doing that? Trekking through entire dangerous forests and on just a meal of rice and buttermilk? I don't think so any of us would be able to do that. More interestingly, during these treks through the hill passes, there were a line of gruff hillmen. So earlier they used to be peasants, but now, since the crops had failed for a long time, they had turned dacoits. But they were still people of his own land. So he befriended them, and these hillmen were called Mughals. And eventually, when he formed the Maratha army, it was the Mughals who found the backbone of the Maratha army. And therefore, some really, really famous Mughals that we will meet in the next couple of episodes who dared to take on the might of Adil Shahi and Mughals at various times. And their tales are no lesser in valor than Shivaji himself. Now, Throughout this early life, we can get a picture of Shivaji. He's not an ordinary person, and he does not think like the other people. He is not addicted to comfort. He wants to train himself. He's always thinking about his people. But we still don't know how he formed the idea of Hindavi Swaraj. I've alluded to it. It was his vision, but how did he arrive at it? There must be something that set it off, right? There is no exact account of this, but there is a folk tale that tells us this. One night, when he was 15 years old, he was watching a dramatization of a work called Padmavat. There occurs a scene when a Hindu queen Padmini jumps into a sacrificial fire called Jauhar along with several other women to escape certain rape at the hands of an invading sultan. This is a very poignant scene in the entire Padmavat. It is said that this scene moved Shivaji so much that he ran out in tears, crying, "Never again, never again." Whether this incident is true or not, we certainly don't know. But what we do know that his first series of conquests began shortly after with a small band of followers that he had aggregated during his travels. We now turn to the early conquests of Shivaji Maharaj. These early conquests provide an insight into the military mindset that led him to such success against his enemies. Up until the 15th century, battles were fought by assembling opposing forces in full view against each other in a large battleground. So, Commander 1 will take his entire army on one end of the plain, Commander 2 will take the other army, and every army knows what the other one is doing. And this is the traditional way of doing battle. Shivaji Maharaj flipped this paradigm to what is now known as guerrilla warfare. As we shall see, many of his conquests were bloodless and displayed sheer strategic and tactical mastery over his enemies. Being a guerrilla warrior is a frame of mind, and throughout this series, I will be dissecting these founding principles of such mindset at various points. The first conquest of Shivaji was a little bit anticlimactic from a military standpoint, but it showed how different he was than others. Once he had formed his mind to make the Swarajya a reality, he did not wait around to ask permission. Rather, he secretly trained his bunch of friends and followers. So, just outside Pune, there is this small fort called Torna. And in the western Ghats near Maharashtra and Karnataka, modern day Karnataka, the rainfall is very heavy during the monsoon season. It is so heavy that most of the activities would cease because the roads would turn muddy. There were no asphalt roads in those times, so business would just be slow. Now, the commander of this fort was a bit of a lazy bum. He thought that, oh, it's just monsoon, nobody is going to come and see, like, what I'm doing. This is a fort on the outskirts, nobody just really cares. And he decided to take his garrison and say, okay, I'm going to the comfort of the city. At least I will have a good bed to sleep on and, just enjoy the luxuries rather than staying in this wet fort. And Shivaji was just waiting for such an opportunity. As soon as the Adil Shahi commander left, he simply walked in and occupied the fort. So I can only imagine the surprise after the monsoon on this commander's face when he returned from his non-sanctioned leave to find the saffron flag of Swarajya flying atop the gates instead of the usual Ottoman green. So one of the things that we will find with Shivaji was that he was always on the move. Once he has captured this fort, he's not going to sit around and just bide his time and try to see what could be done next time. No, he is a very active person by nature, and if he is forced to stay still, it is only because of the strategic reasons. So no sooner had he conquered Torna, he started to look for other forts to capture. His main concern was, now that the rebellion had started, he really needed to guard the way from Bijapur to his main Pune land. So the next fort he conquers is the Singhagad or the Lion Fort, and it is a very uh, difficult fort to capture with a small army. And Shivaji knew this. So he simply walks up to the commander of that fort and offers him a bribe that, hey, just leave the fort to me, hand over the keys to me. And the commander agrees, and this commander is never heard again in the history. The third one is a little bit comic. This is fort called Purandar, and the commander had died, and he had three sons who inherited it. As typically happens, these brothers fought amongst themselves to get the ownership of the fort. Shivaji offered himself as a mediator, and in the guise of the mediator, basically just had the three brothers completely removed from the fort by occupying it in the dead of the night when there was a celebration in his name, and just told them that, hey, you can get these other pieces, but Pratapgarh is mine. And apparently, as the history goes, they never made a move against Shivaji after accepting the other pieces of land. Now, these are three bloodless conquests, but they don't take anything away from Shivaji's military brilliance. He had taken these forts by taking an opportunity against Adil Shahis when he knew that they were more focused on guarding their borders against Mughals. And he knew that these were like minor infractions, and the Adil Shahis could basically ignore him for the time. And in that ignorance, he had basically now fortified his position in Pune, and any approach from Bijapur could be met with at least some resistance using his guerrilla tactics. The main element of Shivaji Maharaj's early conquest was strategic deception. He made the best use of his small forces by picking his battles carefully. This shows that he was very different than other brave kings who rigidly stuck to one particular way of waging war. Most rulers of that time used to have a wax seal that used to sing their praises. In that time, the court language was Persian, so most rulers used to have their seal say something about them in Persian. Shivaji Maharaj's seal, on the other hand, was in Sanskrit, a deliberate choice for asserting his own heritage and his pride in it. It was also a subtle hint to the people who got his letters: I am not going to follow your rules. In fact, the translation of his seal provides a window into his ambition and vision. It reads, "The seal of Shahaji's son Shivaji, waxing like the crescent of the new moon and revered by the world, shines forth for the welfare of mankind." Shivaji must have been 18 at this time. He already has that internal belief that he is on the rise and will shine forth like a full moon one day. However, not everything was smooth sailing for him. Throughout his career, Shivaji Maharaj faced many challenges that put his vision of Hindawi Swaraj at stake. The earliest one happened when the Adil Shahis arrested his father and threatened to execute him if he did not give up the forts. In response, Shivaji turned to the Mughals and offered his services to the Mughal prince Murad Baksh. This forced the Adil Shahis to release his father. Of course, he did not intend to serve the Mughals, but for the time being, it kept the Adil Shahis off his back as he conquered more territory, including the fertile Javali Valley near Pune. Here, he constructed the mighty Pratapgarh fort on a mountain top. This fort would eventually bear witness to the founding event of the Maratha Empire. Shivaji Maharaj was also different from other ambitious rulers because he could envision the use of technologies very differently than his enemies. Once he has conquered the areas around Pune, he understands that naval conflict is going to be inevitable because there were Portuguese and there were British. So he was the first Bharatiya to recognize the importance of having a navy as a military component. He started building his ships as early as 1659 near a small port called Kalyan in Maharashtra. The aim was to have a small guerrilla navy force ready to support him on land or have him supporting in the conquest on the seas nearby in the shallow waters in case he wanted to depend on it. Now, this is very different because Mughals or the other rulers up at that time also had contact with the sea, but they never thought about building a navy. Sadly, this fact was erased from our history books, and we were always taught that the greatest navies were of the British and Portuguese who were able to sail the high seas. In 1658, annoyed by the constant hit and run tactics of Shivaji Maharaj, the Queen Regent of Bijapur challenged someone in the court to take up the responsibility for killing Shivaji. All but one backed out. This man was a towering Afghan by the name of Afzal Khan. He is said to have uttered the following in response to the challenge: "Who is this Shivaji? I will not even need to dismount from my horse and bring him to the court." He was given an army of at least 10,000 cavalry and Turkish artillery pieces. Afzal Khan was a cruel man who was often religiously motivated in his actions. In his march towards Shivaji's stronghold, he destroyed many temples, including the one of goddess Bhavani. Strategically, this was done to draw out Shivaji in an open field. When this failed, he resorted to treachery. He sent a message through a Hindu messenger that he will forgive Shivaji if he willingly came to meet him. His plan was to kill him by disarming him with a false pretext of forgiveness. Shivaji saw through this. He had excellent spies in Afzal Khan's camp and misled Afzal Khan into thinking that he was scared, and eventually he negotiated the terms of meeting. They stated that both him and Afzal Khan would meet alone with two guards outside. On November 10, 1659, Shivaji donned on a chainmail armor underneath his robes, wore the headgear he so fondly remembered in, and took the blessings of goddess Bhavani and his mother. Shivaji knew that Afzal Khan was relying on treachery to kill him. In response, he took a piece that rested on a red velvet pillow and wore it in his hands. From above, it looked like he was wearing two rings. Under the fingers, however, it had sharp blades like the claws of a tiger. Aptly, it was called the Vagnak. As he descended the steps of the fort, he knew that all his daring actions in the past had led him to this point. The air was charged with anticipation, tension, and a strange hope within his chest that he was moving a step closer to his vision. His men, hidden in the deep jungles at strategic exit points, could also share the same emotion as he passed by them on the lone road from the Pratapgarh fort. We now come back to you, the guard standing outside Afzal Khan's tent in the cold morning. You have just seen that infidel Shivaji go inside. You steel yourself for his cries of pain as he is killed by your master. A few minutes later, however, you are horrified to hear the voice of your master in pain and rage. He's shouting, "Daga, Daga, Daga," which translates to treachery, treachery, treachery. As you rush in, you see him on the ground holding his intestines in his hands, and Shivaji standing there with blood dripping out from those fearsome claws. You rush to strike him with your sword, but are cut down by the long swordsman that Shivaji brought along for this very purpose. As life flows out of you, you realize that your master's last words were the opening salvo of a legendary Hindu empire, carved from nothing but willed into existence by one man. I hope you enjoyed this episode in the life of one of the greatest Bharatiyas to be born. In the next episode, we will look at how Shivaji Maharaj exploited this victory into founding a full-fledged empire. Till then, stay hungry, stay foolish. Goodbye.